I spent 40 years negotiating complex peace treaties for nations across the globe. Yet, inside my own home, I allowed a Cold War to freeze everything. I was a master of foreign relations, but a complete failure at human ones. Now, the silence in this room is the only language I speak fluently.
If you look around this room, you will see the debris of a very specific kind of life. There is a brass compass from a naval officer in Jakarta, a silk tapestry from a summit in Kyoto, and a heavy leather trunk that has traveled more miles than most pilots. To the outside world, these are trophies. They are proof that I was a man of consequence, a man who sat at the mahogany tables where history was written. For 4 decades, I lived my life in the high-stakes theater of diplomacy. I was the man you called when communication broke down, when borders were disputed, when the threat of conflict loomed over a region. I became addicted to the adrenaline of relevance. There is a seductive power in believing that the world cannot turn without your hand on the wheel. I remember standing in a glass-walled conference room in Geneva, wearing a 3-piece suit that cost more than my father made in a year, looking at a draft of an accord that would affect millions of lives. I felt like an architect of peace. I believed that my worth was calculated by how many crises I averted and how many hands I shook. I measured my life in signatures and press releases. But looking back from the vantage point of 82 years, I see the optical illusion. I wasn't just working, I was hiding. The complexity of international relations was actually easier for me than the complexity of intimacy. In a negotiation, there are protocols. There are agendas. There are clear rules of engagement. If someone is upset, you offer a concession. If someone is aggressive, you apply sanctions. It is a logical, transactional world. I loved it because it was safe. It allowed me to be important without ever being truly vulnerable. I spent 40 years staring at blueprints for nations I didn't live in, while the foundation of my own house was quietly rotting away. I treated my career like a religion, and now, surrounded by these souvenirs, I realize I was worshiping a God that could not love me back. The tragedy of my life wasn't that I was an angry man or a violent man. The tragedy was that I was a diplomat, even in my own kitchen. I brought the strategies of the embassy into my marriage, and that is what slowly strangled it. When I came home from these long trips, exhausted and full of self-importance, I treated my wife, Eleanor, not as a partner, but as a friendly foreign dignitary. I was polite. I was courteous. I avoided conflict at all costs. I thought I was being a good husband because we never fought. If she was upset about my absence, I would de-escalate the situation with calm logic. If she wanted to scream about how lonely she felt, I would negotiate a peace treaty, promising a vacation next summer, promising to cut back next year. I managed my marriage the way I managed a volatile trade agreement. I maintained the status quo. I smoothed over the rough edges. I ensured there were no outbursts. But I forgot that in marriage, the opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. It's protocol. We drifted into what I now call the roommate phase, but it was colder than that. It was a domestic Cold War. We lived in the same territory, shared the same resources. but an invisible iron curtain had descended between our twin beds. We spoke about logistics, the bills, the garden, the dinner schedule, but we never spoke about us. I remember one evening, sitting in this very chair, reading a briefing paper while she sat on the sofa knitting. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. I told myself, this is peace. This is a stable marriage. I was wrong. It was a ceasefire. And while I was busy keeping the peace, I was losing the war. I allowed her to wither in the vacuum of my emotional absence, thinking that as long as I provided for her and didn't raise my voice, I was doing my job. I negotiated peace for everyone else, but I declared an embargo on my own heart. The deception extended beyond my marriage. It poisoned my friendships too. When you reach a certain level of professional success, you stop making friends and start acquiring contacts. For 30 years, my Rolodex was my most valuable possession. I had lunch with senators, drank scotch with CEOs, and played golf with ambassadors. I called them my friends. We laughed, we slapped each other on the back, we sent Christmas cards. But these weren't friendships. They were strategic alliances. I remember my retirement party clearly. It was a lavish affair in a ballroom in D.C. There were speeches praising my vision and my integrity. Hundreds of people were there, drinking champagne on the company tab. I felt loved. I felt revered. But the moment I handed in my security badge, the phone stopped ringing. It wasn't a gradual decline, it was a cliff. The invitations to the galas stopped. The requests for advice ceased. The people I had spent decades with didn't want me. They wanted my access, my influence, my title. I look at my address book now, and it is a graveyard of transactional relationships. But the deeper pain comes from the realization of the betrayal I committed against the real friends. The ones from college, the ones from my old neighborhood, the ones who knew me before I was the ambassador. I neglected them. I canceled on them. I deemed them low priority compared to a dinner with a trade minister. I traded loyalty for utility. I treated human connection like a currency to be spent, not a garden to be watered. Now, at 82, when I have no utility left to offer, I have no connections left to hold. I am left with a distinct bitterness, realizing that I sacrificed the people who would have visited me in the hospital for the people who only wanted to be seen with me at the podium. The final collapse of my personal empire didn't happen with a shout or a slammed door. It happened with a quiet, devastating permanence. 7 years ago, Eleanor passed away. We were sitting in this very room. I was reading a biography of Churchill. She was looking out the window at the rain. She simply closed her eyes and didn't open them again. And in the terrifying silence that followed the paramedics leaving, I realized I was holding a treaty I had never signed. I had spent 40 years planning to fix our relationship after I retired. I had a mental schedule. First the peace talks in Cairo, then the trade deal in Brussels, and then I would finally be the husband she deserved. I treated our love like a deferred project, something I could get to once the real work was done. But time, unlike a trade delegation, does not wait for you to check your calendar. Now, the consequences of my domestic Cold War are physical, tangible realities. The house is too big. This silence I used to crave, The silence I enforced so I could think has become a heavy, suffocating blanket. I walk through these hallways, and I am the governor of a ghost town. My body, once capable of enduring 20-hour flights and marathon negotiation sessions, has begun its own revolt. My knees ache when it rains, my hands tremble when I pour tea, and I realize that vitality is a loan, not a gift. The cruelest irony is that I have achieved exactly what I negotiated for: total autonomy. I have no one to answer to, no one to compromise with, no one to interrupt my reading. I have perfect peace. And let me tell you, it is absolute hell. This solitude is not a sanctuary. It is a prison cell that I constructed brick by brick with my own ambition. I look at the empty chair opposite me, and I realize that the arguments I avoided, the messy emotions I suppressed, and the inefficient vulnerability I disdained, those were the very things that made life real. I traded the chaotic warmth of a shared life for the sterile coldness of a peaceful one, and now I am freezing to death in a room full of expensive souvenirs. So here I sit, the ambassador of nowhere. I want you to look closely at this room again. Really look at it. You see the globe, the leather-bound books, the artifacts from 100 nations. It looks like the study of a wise, accomplished man. But if you strip away the romantic lighting and the 35mm film grain, what you are actually seeing is a museum of missed opportunities. I am an expert in foreign relations who is a novice in human connection. I have mastered the art of speaking to thousands while forgetting how to speak to the one person who mattered. I have spent the last few years trying to synthesize where it is been. All went wrong, trying to draft a final report on my own life. I have come to realize that my greatest error was a misunderstanding of what strength actually is. In my profession, strength was stoicism. It was the ability to withhold emotion, to wear a mask, to never let them see you bleed. I brought that mask home and wore it at the dinner table. I thought I was protecting my family from my stress, but I was actually hiding myself from their love. I thought that by being the rock, I was being strong. But a rock is lifeless. A rock cannot be embraced. A rock is just a hard thing that people eventually learn to walk around. Now, in the twilight of my life, I understand that true diplomacy isn't about the suppression of conflict. It is about the navigation of conflict with love. It is about the courage to be messy, to be wrong, to be irrationally emotional, and to let someone else see you when you are weak. I have trunks full of treaties that brought peace to nations, but I cannot find a single document that proves I truly lived. I am surrounded by the evidence of where I have been, but I have no one to share where I am going. I am a man who conquered the world but lost his home. This is the synthesis of my 82 years. Success is not a solitary sport. If you win the race but cross the finish line alone, you haven't won anything. You've just run a very long way to find out you are by yourself. I see you out there, perhaps in your 30s or 40s, building your own empires. You are tired, you are ambitious, you feel the weight of the world on your shoulders, and you tell yourself that you are doing it for them, for your spouse, for your children, for your future. You tell yourself that once you get that promotion, once you close that deal, once you reach that number in the bank account, then you will turn your attention to the people in your house. You treat your loved ones like a pause button that you can press whenever work calls. But I am here to tell you, from the other side of the finish line that the button doesn't pause time, it only pauses love, and eventually the battery dies. If you want to avoid this empty chair, you must learn to disarm at the door. When you turn the key in your lock at night, you must consciously strip off the armor of your profession. Leave the CEO, the architect, the manager, and the diplomat on the front porch. Walk inside as a human being. Be inefficient. Be vulnerable. Engage in the messy, illogical, beautiful friction of intimacy. Do not negotiate with your family. Surrender to them. Fight with them if you must, but never, ever let the silence settle. Do not manage your home. Live in it. Because the only legacy that matters is not the treaties you signed, but the hands you held.
I conquered the world, yet I am a refugee in my own home. The applause of the crowd eventually fades into a deafening, permanent silence. Do not wait until the room is empty to start speaking the truth. I was a great man, but I wish I had been a good one.